Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Raina Shikedi Lenfest. I'm a librarian at FLOW, the Family Library Organization, which is a library consortium in Boston. And I'm also joined by Sydney Viegas and Jen Ronca, also from FLOW. We are a few of the faces behind the ComCat Help Desk. So today we'll be focusing on troubleshooting, some common problems, and how to make the most of the tools that you have using ComCat. We will be sharing the recording and slides with everyone so that you have those to look back on. And if you have questions that come up while we're talking, feel free to put those in the chat. Since there are three of us, we can take a look, but we'll also be leaving some time open for questions at the end as well. I think that's all I have to say, so I will pass them on to Sydney to talk about the help desk.
Hello everyone, I'm Sydney Viegas. I am FLOW's newest library services assistant. I mostly handle ComCat announcements, help desk things, so you might see my name floating around in email. Today, I'm going to be speaking about sort of the introduction to the help desk and resources and ComCat itself. So the ComCat help desk is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, with some holiday exceptions. Usually if we are closed on a holiday, we will send out an announcement the day before. So you'll always know when we're open and when we're closed. For submitting a ticket, if you run into any issues with ComCat, the fastest way is to submit a ticket through either the help desk page, the FLOW Lib Answers website, which also brings you to a tab where you can submit a ticket, or by sending an email just to the comcat@flow.libanswers.com page. So for some additional resources, we do have a help desk website, and this includes FAQs to common ComCat issues and some video tutorials. We do recommend before submitting a ticket that you just check out the FAQ page and see if the answer to your question is there. In ComCat itself, we also have the Share It support page and the resources that Share It themselves provides, including their policy page, and we also have quick guides. We are focusing on relocating these to the help desk page just so that they're a little easier to access, but for now you can locate those within ComCat itself. Run into any system emergencies, or if you see that a system is down, we first ask you to confirm that the issue is not localized just to your computer or to your internet connection. You could do this by checking the system status page for any reported system down issues. And if this happens during hours when the help desk is open, you can either submit a ticket or call our office. And if the help desk is closed, you can submit an email, just the emergency@flow.org email, and we do have people checking that when the office is closed. So before going into some common troubleshooting procedures, I just wanted to give a preview of the life of a ComCat request from when it's placed to when it's complete. So in the beginning, the request will be initiated by a staff or a patron at the borrowing library. It'll either be automatically or manually approved and sent to the lending library. And then you'll see in ComCat that that request has pending status. That means that it has gone through to the lending library. The lending library will then remove the requested item from the shelf. They will go into ComCat and change the request status to shipped. And this sends a message to your local ILS to check the item out. And then it'll provide a bootstrap that you'll print and attach to the item. And from there, you place the item in your bin for shipping, and it is shipped out to the borrowing library. Borrowing end, the item will arrive in the shipping bin, and then you'll go into ComCat and change the item status to received. This creates a temporary item record in your ILS and also places a hold in the patron's account. From there, you'll check out the item to the patron in your ILS, so you don't need to check it out using ComCat. The patron will then use and return the item, and once that happens, you go into ComCat and change the request status to returned. And this also checks the item back in on your ILS and removes it from the patron's account. From there, you'll attach a routing slip and place it in the bin for shipping, and then it'll be sent back to the lending library. And then once the lending library receives the item back, they'll go into ComCat and change the status to checked in, which then checks it in their ILS and marks it complete in ComCat. After it's marked complete, you don't have to do anything else. The request will be deleted automatically after 7 days, and the request is over.
Can you see my screen okay? Okay, great. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is some common troubleshooting for requests that we see very frequently coming into the help desk. So I'm going to talk about troubleshooting for placing and filling requests. And then Raina will talk about troubleshooting for receiving requests. This does assume that like you are comfortable with the basic requesting and process in ComCat, but if you need a refresher on some of those topics, we do have other trainings that are available for that. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was a common point of confusion, which is the difference between requestable and available. So when you're placing a request, you're going to be searching for an item, right? You're going to look through the available list here, find a record, and then under where to find it, you'll see the information about which items are available in ComCat to lend. So the two important columns that you want to pay attention to here are going to be your ILL lender column and the status column. And ILL lender column, this means, is this item available to lend through ComCat? So this is determined by the shelving location. For every single shelving location at every network, we have that mapped to ComCat as to whether it is available or not available. And if it is available to lend, it will say ILL lender here in this column. And if it is not available, that will be blank in this section. And it should say something like the name of the library, not requestable over here. And so what that means is that when you place a request for an item, this library will never be added as a lender on that request because their item is not lendable. The other status that you can pay attention to here is this status column. And this is going to be either available or not available. And even something that is not lendable might actually be available, but if it's not lendable, it's never going to be added to the request. If something is not available, it usually means that it is checked out, or it might be an item that's on order. In that case, this library will potentially be added as a lender on the request. But if ComCat tries to place a request at that library and their item isn't available, it's going to skip that lender. And then it's going to go on to the next lender in the list if there are other lenders. So here is a little table that will just help you remember what those statuses mean and their implications for the requesting process. So when you place a request, the first status that your request is going to go into always is called awaiting lenders. And what's happening when your request is in that status is ComCat is building what's called the lender list. I think one misconception that a lot of people have is that if you're on a record like this and you hit request this item, that you're placing a request with Noble for these items in Noble. But that's not what actually happens, and there's a good reason for that. What it does mean if you place a request from this record is that ComCat is going to pull in all of the information on this record, and it's going to use that information to look for any potential lenders in ComCat that own that item. And it's going to prioritize the ISBN. here if an ISBN exists. It can also use other identifiers to find matches, like maybe an LCCN number. If no identifiers like this exist on the record, it's going to fall back to try to match on the title, because a record will always have a title. So requests that match on the title may not be as successful as requests that match on another identifier. But so yes, so this identifying information is going to be used to look for any potential lenders in ComCat. And then ComCat is going to do what's called a load balancing. It's going to use its load balancing algorithm. So that's going to look for any lenders. It's going to create a list of those lenders, and it's going to put them in order of which lender it's going to try to request the item from first. And it's going to do that in such a way that no one library or no one network has an unfair share of requests. So the exception to this is if you're a library, maybe like UMass Amherst, that has a very unique collection and there are no other lenders in ComCat for your items. So in that case, there are some libraries that do get a lot more requests than other libraries just because they do have a unique collection. But when you as the librarian are going in to place a request, you can't necessarily control where that request is going. ComCat is doing things on the back end to figure that out and try to share the requests between libraries. But I am going to talk about a way that you can specifically request items and choose where requests are going to go. And this is very helpful for troubleshooting and things like that. But before I do that, let me circle back around to statuses here. So we talked about awaiting lender status. Awaiting approval is a status that typically you would only see if there's a patron note on the request. What awaiting approval means is that ComCat is waiting for approval from you, the librarian, to look at the request, change that manually to approve, send, and submit it. So there is a bit of a bug with this right now, so I'm going to circle back to that in a second. The next status that you will see is potentially the status pending. That means that ComCat has gone through the lender list. It's found a available item from a lender, and the request is pending with that lending library now. If, for instance, there are no potential lenders in ComCat for an item, which can happen, that request would go to unfilled. That means there's no lenders. If there are lenders in ComCat for an item, but all of those lenders, their item is unavailable, or it's checked out or something like that, then your request could end up in retry. And what that means is that you can retry to approve, send that request again in the future, maybe when those items are available. So let's circle back to awaiting approval. So there is a bug in ComCat right now where requests that don't have a patron note are sometimes ending up in this awaiting approval status. And we did work with a ComCat vendor to implement a workaround so that requests that do have lenders and end up in awaiting approval status will automatically be approved sent. So you don't have to do it manually. You might see this show up in request history. It's a process. It'll say AG staff, approve send. That means that the script has automatically sent this request because it had lenders. And that happens about every 15 minutes. So if something happens like that with your request, it should be taken care of. The exception to this is requests that have no lenders. So this is an example of a request that had no lenders at all in ComCat. It ended up in awaiting approval, but because it has no lenders, the script isn't going to be able to approve, send it, and fix it. So this is something that you should use the same workflow on something like this that you would use on a request that was unfilled. And I'm going to kind of go through some troubleshooting for requests like these if they're unfilled or if they have no lenders and they're stuck in awaiting approval. And I will use this one here as an example. Okay, so I think the first thing that you might notice about this record is that it doesn't have any identifiers. It doesn't have an ISBN or an ISSN. If you look at the request history in the bottom here, it will actually tell you the record that was used to create this request. This is the identifier for that record, and it's a record from UMass Amherst. Now, you can't search in ComCat for this number. It won't come up, but if you know the title and identifying information, you could try to search and find this record if you wanted to see the exact record that the patron of the librarian used to place the request. So yes, in this case, this record just didn't have a lot of identifying information. It didn't find any matches. Maybe it's a situation where there are no lenders in ComCat for this item. In that case, you should cancel the request. That triggers a message to the patron so that they know that this item just isn't available. In this case, I can maybe see that actually, this patron wants Emma by Jane Austen in a book form. So I can infer that this probably is available somewhere in ComCat. So maybe you as a librarian know better than the system now. You can actually find matches for this yourself, and you can create your own lender list. So one option here is this Rebuild Lender List button. This button is actually only useful in a very limited set of circumstances. So when you hit Rebuild Lender List, what it does is send this request into awaiting lenders again, and it uses all of the original information from the original record to try to find lenders. So the only reason that this might help you find new lenders is if some library has, since this request has been placed, added an item to ComCat that matches the matching parameters that ComCat has. If you try to add an ISBN here or something like that, that's not going to help Rebuild Lender List finding matches. So it can't hurt to try to use the Rebuild Lender List right off the bat, just in case maybe there is a new item in ComCat that can get a match. I would say most of the time, it's probably not going to help you in that situation, but it's not going to hurt anything if you want to try to do that. So the next thing I can do if I've tried Rebuild Lender List and I still don't have any lenders on this request is now I can go and create my own lender list. Which, by the way, this is what a full lender list will look like. So the lender list is just information that ComCat uses to know which library to send the request to and which item is being requested. And it's going to go in order down all of these libraries, look for an item that's available, and it's going to place a request with the first available item that it can find matching on the list. So it's actually really easy to create or edit the lender list, and all the information that you need to do it is available on the record detail page. So say that I know that this patron is looking for Emma by Jane Austen. I can search for this item. I can find some available items at a network, and I can create the lender list. So the first piece of information that I need is the library code. If you are logged in, the library code is going to be available by clicking on the library name, and you can highlight it at the top here. And we can add it here, and then you're going to just add in a comma. The next piece of information that you need is the days to respond. This is always going to be 4 by ComCat policy. We always give the lending library 4 days to respond to a request. So you're going to write 4 and then another comma. The next thing that you need is the call number. So you can go ahead and pull the call number from here. I will give you a caution about call number. If there is an extra comma in the call number, you should remove that, because otherwise it could cause some problems when placing the request. So if that happens, just remove a comma. It's not going to break anything, but you just want to make sure to get rid of that. And then comma at the end of that. And the last thing that we need is the system number. And the system number is right on the top of the page here. And we'll add that in the end. And by the way, the system number is the same as this record identifier here. So once I've done that, so this is all the information that ComCat needs to send a request to this library for this item that you're looking for. If you want, you can continue to add additional lenders using that same method, and then you would go ahead and hit submit. And once you do that, the lender list should be updated. With your new information here, and then you would go ahead and change this to approve send, and then hopefully you would get that pending with that library, assuming that those items are available, which you can tell here that they should be available. So that should work. There's really nothing that you can break in the lender list. If you happen to put in something wrong, the request just won't work, but it's not really going to break anything. So you shouldn't be too intimidated to go about editing that yourself. Okay. I showed you a little bit about how to look at request history. I won't go too in-depth into that right now. I'm going to talk now about troubleshooting a couple things when it comes to filling requests. And unfortunately, I don't have a good visual to show for you on this because it's really going to depend on your system. But when I'm talking about ILS, I'm talking about Polaris or Sierra or Folio or whatever system that your library uses to communicate with ComCat. So in some networks, you will actually get a hold in your ILS for your ComCat request. And sometimes it happens that you get a hold for an item, you pull that item off the shelf, you go to look in the ComCat request, and actually you see a request for the same library, but it's not the title that you're holding in your hand. In that case, you should always look at your ComCat queue as the source of truth. So if it is a request and this information in the request is for Emma by Jane Austen, and the title that you have a hold on is something completely different, what the patron wanted was the information here. And so if they don't match, typically the reason that they don't match is because this ISBN that ComCat used to match on the record matches a different record in your system. And that happens with records. It's not always a perfect system. So in that case, what you should do is go ahead and mark that request will not supply, not owned. And that will let the lending library know why you weren't able to supply the item. The other thing you could do in that case is you can actually send in a ticket to us, because if you were added incorrectly as a lender, it could be that there's other lenders that were added incorrectly. And we can actually go in and, just like I was showing you before, manually edit the lender list because sometimes we know better than the system. And we can just use our common sense and see which libraries actually own the item that the patron's looking for. And also you as the lender could do that yourself if you were comfortable with doing that. But the borrower can do that themselves on their side, but as the lender, you can go ahead and just mark that will not supply in that case. The other situation that happens with filling requests is sometimes there's a hold, and it's not that there's a mismatch in your ComCat queue, but you actually just don't have anything in your ComCat queue that's referencing that hold. In that case, again, your ComCat queue is just going to be your source of truth. So sometimes miscommunications happen between the systems. Sometimes a hold doesn't get canceled in your system properly. If there's nothing in your ComCat queue that matches up, you can be pretty comfortable in just canceling that hold and assuming that it was just a miscommunication between the systems. But if there's anything that seems very off about it, you can definitely also reach out to your network office and they can help you out with that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Raina now to talk about troubleshooting receiving requests.
Jen, do you want to go ahead and take a quick question now while I pull this up?
Sure.
Hi, Jen. I have a question. I've actually had a situation where the reverse is true, where there is a hold showing up in ComCat,
Mm-hmm.
but when we run our pull list through Evergreen, that hold is not showing.
Oh, it's not showing up in
It's the
Interesting.
exact reverse of the scenario you just gave. I don't normally I just kind of cancel that in ComCat because there's no way, because I've tried checking, I find the item, I check it in Evergreen, which normally triggers the ComCat hold, and nothing shows up. So do you have any idea of why that would happen or what to do to?
I'm not sure. I don't know that we've had a lot of tickets about that, so I'm not sure why that would happen. It would be interesting to look at an example.
Okay, I'll next time I get one,
yeah,
but it doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I would say if that does happen, you could possibly skip like the check-in process for that and just go straight to like marking the request shipped. Everything does seem to match up. I don't think that would necessarily cause any problems in your system to do that, but.
Okay, I have done that as well. I just didn't know if there was anything. And then I don't know if anyone's going to speak to this, but I'm just thinking of it now. Sometimes I get requests in ComCat and there's no barcode.
Yes.
Okay, is that something that's going to get spoken about, or is it a question that can be answered now?
So it depends on your system. So some networks don't get that barcode automatically, pre-populated in the request. If it's not there, you can I would just say it's probably fine. You can just go ahead and scan the item and scan the actual barcode into that field if that happens.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about receiving requests and some of the common problems that can come up at that step. So to orient ourselves, the lending library has shipped the item, it's arrived at the borrowing library, and now we, being the borrowing library, would like to change the request status to received. And then we can check out the item to the patron. So by changing the request status to received in ComCat, it will create a temporary item record in the ILS, and it should put a hold on the patron's account. If something prevents one of those things from happening, the request will not go into the received status. So the first common problem that I'm going to talk about is a duplicate barcode error. So you'll try to change the request status to received, and you'll see something like NSIP error, cannot receive item, duplicate item, item with barcode, something already exists, or something like that. And so what this means is an item already exists in the ILS with the same item barcode as the item that you're now trying to receive in ComCat. So a new temporary item record cannot be created with that barcode since it already exists. What you'll do in this case is you should look in the ILS to see if you can find the item that has that same barcode as the one that you're trying to receive. And it does need to be removed in the ILS before you can receive the request in ComCat. If you need any assistance doing that, if you maybe don't have permissions or aren't comfortable, if you're not sure about it, your network's office or system admin should be able to help you to do that. And why this can happen, sometimes if an exact item was borrowed in the system before, but the temporary item record created at that time wasn't deleted, although it should have been, then you could see the duplicate barcode error. Or sometimes it may be that the first time you try to receive the request in ComCat, the action actually times out. One of the systems doesn't respond to the other in time. So then the request status won't go into received, but it will still create the temporary item record in the ILS. So then you go to mark it received again, and then you hit duplicate barcode. So that one can be frustrating, but there is a way to fix it in the ILS. I will also note if you're a library in the sales network and you see like an NSIP accept item error that doesn't say duplicate item, it just says a lot of things. the first thing I would always recommend checking is if there's an item record with that same barcode in the ILS, because that is the most common cause. So a second issue that might come up when you try to receive a request is unknown user. So you'll try to change that request status to received, and you'll get something like unzip accept item, cannot receive item, maybe unknown user or user is not known, user ID, and may list a barcode. And what this means is the patron's barcode in the ComCat request is not found in the ILS. That could be because the patron's barcode changed, maybe they got a new card or something like that. So the first thing to do is check in the ILS to see if you can find that patron and see if their barcode in the ILS is different than it is showing in the ComCat request. And if that's the case, then we found the issue, and how to fix it depends on your library. So if you are in CW, Mars, MBLN, MVLC, Noble, or OCLN, the good news is that you can actually update the request with the new barcode yourself. We have some instructions and I'll go through those in a minute. Everyone else, contact the help desk, let us know the patron's correct barcode. And this is something we can't actually fix ourselves, but we'll let the vendor, the ComCat vendor, Autographics, know they can fix it. We'll let you know as soon as it's done so that you can receive the request for the patron. So I'm going to go through the steps for how you can force the patron barcode to update in the request. I do have an FAQ on the help desk page. I linked it in the slides, and this just goes through those steps as well, so you don't need to memorize them, but can be good to give this a try when you come across this error if you're in one of those networks to which this applies. So say that we have this request and we go to receive it. And oh no, we hit unknown user. User is not known. Not the first time we've hit that one. And so what we can do is we go look down in the request and see what the barcode is. So it also is showing in the error, but see what that patron's barcode is that was used to place the request. So maybe in this case, we could check in our local system and we could see that that patron's barcode is now something different. So if we were in one of those networks, and this demo requires a little bit of imagination because I'm not using one of those libraries, but I can still go through the steps. We just won't actually see it updated. We will get a blank ILL request. We can type in the patron's new correct barcode, do a barcode search. As long as they exist in the ILS, they should come up, click on them, and it will populate the request form. So the purpose of doing this isn't to place a new request. The purpose of getting to the request form is so that we completed the patron lookup process. And by doing the patron lookup, if we were in one of those 5 networks, we should be able to force the request to update. So you can go ahead and cancel the new request, and then it can go back to the request that we had a problem with. And if we were in one of those networks, hypothetically, this card number should be updated and we could go ahead and use received. If you do have any issues with that and you are supposed to be able to fix it, let us know. Sometimes something can go wrong with that process. So sometimes you may just see a generic cannot receive error, but it doesn't say anything helpful like duplicate barcode or unknown user. It just says cannot receive. So the first thing I would always check is, does an item with that barcode already exist in your ILS? That is a very common cause that can still produce a generic message like the one that you see on the screen. And the second thing would be, are there any restrictions on the patron's account in the ILS? So maybe they're expired, or they have some fines, maybe they've reached a maximum number of holds. Anything that would be blocking them from being allowed to place a hold or allowed to place an ILL hold. That would be preventing the request from being able to go into received in ComCat. So your network's office would be able to help you maybe identify restrictions if you can't find them. You can also reach out to us about this. Maybe something else is going on. But the first two things we're always going to ask is duplicate barcode, restrictions on patron's account, because those can often be causing the problem. And sometimes you may just not be able to receive a request in ComCat. Maybe there's some kind of error that cannot be resolved, something that just cannot, it's not going to work. So you can use a new status. It's called received disable NSIP. And this is kind of best used as a last resort, definitely better to resolve the error if you can. But if that's not possible, using received disable NSIP allows the request to go into received, but in name only. So it will not create an item record in the ILS, and it will not put a hold on the patron's account. The only thing it will do is put it into received in ComCat. So the benefit of this is it does let the lending library know that you got the item. And it also will let you select returned when the patron's done with the item. Usually returned is only an option if you get to received. But you still will need to manually create a record in the ILS to use to check out to the patrons, like fast add, something like that, to do that manually, because that will not be done if you use receive, disable, and NSIP. So the thing to note about this status is it actually will not appear as an option unless you have hit an error. So you can't just decide to use it. You will have to hit an NSIP error before it's allowed. That's the functionality of this as it was introduced. So if I hadn't hit an error on this request, this would be grayed out. I could not click on it. But because I have with this unknown user issue, maybe that was something we just couldn't fix on this one. Can use receive, disable, NSIP. Should be able to submit that, and we put it into received. You'll be able to see that receive, disable, NSIP was used by looking at this history information. However, the request itself will show in the received status. And so then we will need to manually create the item record in the ILS to use to check out to the patron, and then select return for then. Okay, so a few more things that can happen when you're trying to receive a request. Sometimes a library may get an item in delivery and it came from a different library than is listed as the lending library in the request. What usually happens in this case is a library gets a request in ComCat and they fill it, but they don't mark it shipped. And then the request in ComCat just goes on to the next lender who maybe also fills it. And then the borrowing library ends up with an item that they're confused about because it came from someone else. So as a general rule, it's best only to receive an item in ComCat if it came from the lending library that's listed in the request. If it came from someone else and you tried to receive it in the request, the barcodes would be wrong and it's impossible to track someone else's item, and it gets very messy very quickly. So generally speaking, best to only receive it if it came from the lending library listed. If it came from someone else and it's supposed to be for that request, I just send it back to the library that sent it. A variation that I can see on this one is if there's only one possible lender of the item and they fill it, but they don't mark it shipped, then the borrowing library's request may go into retry, but they get the item anyways. So then they can't receive it because it's in retry status. And if this happens, you can let us know the request information. We can see if we can get the requests updated to reflect the correct status. What we can do kind of depends on what the lending library did, but we can at least give you some instructions for dealing with that. Sometimes you may just have to manually receive it if the request cannot be updated. And this is a good reminder to just remember to mark those requests shipped in ComCat, because otherwise it can get really messy. And the last common problem that sometimes comes up is you receive a request in ComCat and then, oh no, I accidentally marked it returned. This one can happen, it's easy to do. Unfortunately, the return status is not reversible because of the steps that it triggers in the ILS. So if this happens, you can just add a borrower's note and then you'll need to manually check out that item to the patron in the ILS. Okay, so any of these problems that Jen and I have talked about are not incredibly unusual. They will come up sometimes. But if you begin to see any of these impacting most or all requests, please let us know. There's probably something wrong. It could be ComCat, it could be the ILS, it could be the connection. Probably something that's wrong if you're seeing this on most or all requests. So that was a lot of problems that we talked about, and we want you to have tools that you can use, but there are limitations to what you can do, and there are some things only we can do, and there are also limitations to that. So I just want to go briefly through some of the things that library staff can do, network staff, and then the ComCat help desk can do with regards to some of these issues in ComCat. So library staff can directly support patrons with using ComCat, placing requests, helping them with issues or questions that they're seeing. And then of course, please escalate to us as needed to resolve those. So the help desk doesn't work with patrons directly. Library staff can be that first level of support for their own patrons, but then let us know about those issues. Library staff can also troubleshoot common problems and then reach out to us, as we've talked about. And then the big thing I want to highlight is library staff can communicate with each other, communicate with trading partners. Sometimes the most efficient way to figure out something about an item, let them know something, ask a question, talk about a lost item. Something like that can be done best if it's just done directly between the two libraries. And there are a few ways that you can find this contact information easily in ComCat. From the borrower's view on a request, you should see that lender information, so lender's email, lender's phone. If that's not, maybe there isn't like an active request and you just want to find that ILL contact in ComCat, you can go to ILL admin on the staff dashboard, search library information, and then you can type in like a name or some kind of identifier, pull up that library's information, and you should be able to see a contact and contact information there that you can use. And for some issues, or sometimes it may be most helpful to ask your network office or system admin if you have them. And for Flow and Helm, that is also us. They should be able to help you with removing item records that could be causing that duplicate barcode error. They would also be able to help you with restrictions on a patron's account that might be preventing you from receiving the item. You can find those restrictions or weren't sure about those. They would be able to help you resolve cataloging issues, maybe an item status, figure out if an item ought to be lendable in ComCat, something like that. Basically anything that just involves items and patrons in the ILS and not necessarily in ComCat. But please follow your network's instructions. Some of them just ask that library staff reach out to them first for ComCat issues because they can often address those best for your library's needs. So listen to them. And finally, asking the ComCat help desk general questions about using ComCat, help troubleshooting problems, ask us about updating library information, like address, phone, contact. Only we can do this. You can ask us if your library is closing or if it has been closed, if it's reopening. We will be able to turn on or off lending, borrowing, figure out what you need with that. And then let us know about frequent or significant issues that you see while using ComCat. What we'll do is we'll try to replicate and identify those. Maybe it's something that's known or maybe it isn't. And then we'll likely be just escalating those to the ComCat vendor who will be able to address the issue itself. And we have a few bonus FAQs, which I think we have time for. So Jen, do you want to talk about lost items?
Okay, sure. Let me share my screen again. Okay, here are some other common questions that we get at the help desk. So one of them is about what happens to lost items, whether a patron loses the item or whether that item was possibly lost in delivery. By policy, and you can find the ComCat policy on the ComCat site itself. But the borrowing library is responsible for the item once it leaves the lending library. If it happens that it is lost in delivery, the lending library can also submit a claim to Optima for that. So if there's delivery problems, you should get in touch with Optima. If it's a situation where the patron lost the item, there are no overdue fines ever charged for ComCat items, or there should not be. However, if an item is lost, there may be a lost fee that is charged. If charges occur, those don't occur in ComCat at all. ComCat will never make any charges or take any payments or anything like that. Those transactions occur between the lending and the borrowing library directly. The borrowing library may also pass on charges for any items that their patron lost to their patron, but they are responsible for covering those charges to the lending library in that situation. So we do have more details about that on the policies page. And then the other question that we get a lot is about renewals. So sometimes you may see an option to renew an item in ComCat if it goes into overdue status. By policy, ComCat doesn't allow renewals. The system does have that option in the list, which you will see. But if you try to use it, nothing will happen because your ILS has circulation rules typically that prevent renewals of ComCat items, and ComCat can't override those. So if you do try to renew something, that's not actually going to change the due date in your system. So if something happens where an item is overdue, and it would be best to communicate directly with the lending library about that and let them know the circumstances and work that out between the two of you. So probably the status would still say overdue. You can add notes on the request in that case. Okay, and so now we're on the questions portion. I did see some questions come in the chat. So let me pull those up here for a second. Let me also stop sharing my screen.
If you had a question that we didn't get to, give a shout.
I saw a question come in from Samantha she was following up also on what Andrea said. So she said that I've noticed lately ComCat requests aren't showing up on Noble pull lists as they are new to our library and still within their age hold protection time. So essentially Noble is unwilling to send it out to other libraries because it's only available to our patrons. So yes, that is something that can happen because like I said before, ComCat only knows requestable or not requestable based on shelving location. So if you don't use a unique shelving location for items like that, then ComCat can't make those items not requestable. And then if a request does show up on an item like that, your system won't allow the hold, right? So it probably depends on the ILS what happens. In some cases, I think that lender might be skipped. It sounds like in this case with Evergreen, maybe that lender is not skipped. So you might have something in your queue, but there's no hold in your system. And it might be because holds aren't allowed on that item. So yes, to go back to Andrea's question, if you do see that happen, something in your ComCat queue, no hold in your system, it could be because it's restricted. So I would definitely double check and make sure that's something that you can lend out and determine what you're going to do from there. Maybe you need to mark it unfilled because you're not able to lend it out. Maybe if you did want to make an exception and override that, would be something you talk to your network about, I think, but you would have to take off that restriction before you could ship that item. Andrew, did you have a
I have a question. how does it get determined when something is listed as not requestable? I
Mhm.
feel like I've had some occasions where there's an item in the ComCat catalog, and all those columns that you tell us to check, you know, it says it's an ILL lender, it says it's status available, but then the library has next to, you know, not requestable. Or I have had an occasion or two where something is supposed to be requestable. Then I end up calling the owning library and they're like, oh no, we don't lend, you know, that doesn't get lent out. So I know it's not a perfect system and you're not going to get 100% accuracy, but it is
Yeah.
frustrating sometimes that things are, you know, libraries are listed as ILL lenders,
Mhm.
but then, you know, something's not requestable. Or is there a way to maybe make that not requestable its own field? Because that's sometimes easy to miss, you know, because it's
Yeah.
tacked on right next after the library's name. And it's hard, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, I can't get this at all.
Yeah. I agree. It's sometimes easy to miss that or like not understand what's happening because it's, you know, it does say available then for that item, even if it's not requestable. So that can be confusing. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of control over that, but that is something that like we can talk to the ILO vendor about. That's autographics and maybe make like an enhancement request if it's something that people have a lot of confusion about. So we definitely take feedback like that into consideration. We can bring it to the vendor to try to maybe make changes for that in the future. So yeah, as far as not requestable or requestable shelving locations, if you as a library see something that's requestable that you're like, we know that shelving location should not be requestable, you can reach out to us. You can reach out to your network as well, and they can let us know. So we usually work directly with the network to get the list of shelving locations and make sure that those are mapped correctly as requestable or not requestable.
I did see one question in the chat that I answered, but I'm going to bring attention to it because it's a good one. I didn't talk about this. Sometimes when checking in an item in ComCat, you may see an NSIP error, like NSIP check an item, unknown item, something like that. And so if you see an error at that step when checking in, what it usually means is that you checked the item in the ILS first, and then you checked it into ComCat. So when you check it into ComCat, it sends a message to the ILS saying, check in this item. And if the item was already checked in, you'll see like an unknown item or an error like that. So it doesn't cause any issues. It still will go into check-in in ComCat, even if you see that error. But if you do check it into ComCat first, instead of checking it into the ILS, you don't have to check it into the ILS because checking it in ComCat checks it in the ILS. Any other questions? Okay, well, I hope we got to everything in the chat. If you have questions that you think of, feel free to put in a ticket to the help desk. If maybe it's not like a problem, but something you just want to figure out, definitely let us know about that. And we can see, maybe we can give you some information or address something specifically. I definitely hear the noble thing about the pull list, and that could definitely be something we could look into depending on what's happening with how those are getting processed in your system. So anything else coming? We've had items that a patron returned and that got returned in ComCat, but we're still on their Evergreen account. Yeah, so doing that returned step in ComCat should remove them from the account. There can be times in which maybe that returned step got skipped for some reason, or maybe your system didn't respond successfully in removing that. So if that happens, please let us know and we can take a look at what might be going on there. All right, well, not seeing anything else. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.